Want to welcome all of you in this online event. From different corners of the world, we cross borders to meet, to gain more knowledge of the situation in the Middle East. The Middle East has its own historical, cultural, religious, and political development, and it is, as all of us know, very complex. The longing for peace, justice, and less tension is huge. We share this longing with our Christian churches and Muslim friends in DK and abroad, and of course in Palestine. Initiatives as Chaos Palestine, BDS, etc. shows an international mobilization, and in Denmark, you can join the Betlehems Venner, Friends of Bethlehem, if you want to contribute to this ongoing conversation and living hope. A special welcome to our three experts, we could say, from three different continents: Palestine, the Middle East, DK, Europe, and the US. First of all, Mitri Raheb, the president of Dar al-Khelima University College of Arts and Culture. Mitri, well known in Denmark, having many friends here and all over the world, traveling, giving voice to the voiceless. Today also working in KAFKAO, a Middle East Christian academic forum with participants from Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine, with the theme Pax Americana, Palestine and the Middle East in the Trump era. And then from Denmark, our local expert, you could say so, Peter Lodberg, professor and doctor in theology at Aarhus University, well known from TV, radio, newspapers concerning Palestine and faith in general, author of several books, the latest Tro versus Tro, Faith versus Faith, as late as February 21. And then from far away, Ghassan Rubeiz, living in Washington, DC, in the US, a well-known blogger and journalist, commenting the Middle East situation for several decades, and worked years ago for WCC, World Council of Churches, as General Secretary for the Middle East section. And your theme is the Abraham Accords, undermined much needed peace with Palestinians. And I forgot to tell the theme from Peter, Billy Graham and Christian zionism. A few words in Danish, I apologize. I dag skulle vi jo have haft vores traditionelle årsmøde i Betlehems Venner, og foråret er på vej, og sådan plejer det at være, når vi mødes i Middelfart med blik ud over Lillebælt. Men corona har selvfølgelig ændret også på det. Vi håber, I bliver hængende på her på skærmen, og I skal vide, at vores foredrag også i dag bliver tilgængeligt på vores hjemmeside. Og at generalforsamlingen bliver gennemført til den 13. september, og det bliver i Fredericia, og det bliver om eftermiddagen. I skal vide, at det er utrolig stor betydning, at vores netværk vokser, og det kan kun ske gennem jer. Og I kan være med til gennem vores netværk, og vi kan sammen sprede et mere nuanceret billede af situationen i Israel-Palæstina. Så hjælp os gerne, og tak for jeres engagement allerede nu. Også tak for økonomisk støtte, som ofte går til studerende på Dar al-Khelima Universitetet. Yeah, we will get started First, we'll have the 3 lectures and then a short break, and then an intern discussion, conversation for you three, and then at the end, questions and comments from the audience. Enjoy this special event and feel free to use the chat room during the lectures. Please, Mitri, then it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Vita, for this introduction. And I'm very glad to be with you all. I see already many friends joining, not only from Denmark, but from Scandinavia. And great to be with Peter and Ghassan this afternoon. Actually, Betlehem Venner is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. Congratulations!
Thank you.
I mean, this is a great achievement if you think of it, and I'm glad that thanks to so many of you who are active all the time, this work continue on. I would have loved to be with you in person, but because of the pandemic, we need to do it this way. So I cannot give you hugs. So and maybe at the pandemic, hugs are not something even good. So the theme I thought I will focus on is Pax Americana, Palestine and the Middle East in the Trump era. And I'm sure there will be some overlap maybe with Ghassan, but I look forward for the discussion afterwards. And the question may be, why look back? I mean, isn't Trump era over? And so should we focus on Biden? I mean, I have published few things about Biden and what change might Biden bring or not. But the Trump era, unfortunately, is not over for many reasons. One, because over 70 million people voted for him, and they are not going to disappear overnight. But also some of the things that he did, like moving the embassy to Jerusalem, etc., will not be undo in the coming years. What I'm interested in is basically quickly to look at how the Bible and theology has been weaponized in the Trump era by his base, but then to see that actually it's more than that. The American support to Israel is not only something that is based on the Bible. It's much more complicated. And so I will look at that in the second half a bit more in depth. If we look at the Trump era and his so-called deal of the century, or what I call here the Pax Romana, it has 3 legs, 3 elements. And all 3 elements, if you look even at the title, you can see how the Bible is being used or misused. The first thing that he did was moving the American embassy to Jerusalem. While for Trump himself, this was based on the facts on the ground, meaning that the Israeli Knesset, etc., are in Jerusalem. For his base, but even for his vice president, Pence, who is a Catholic Christian Zionist, the Bible played a very important role. And there, actually, if you, for example, if you listen to the speech that Pence gave at the Israeli Knesset, he talks about King David having made Jerusalem as the capital of Israel 3,000 years ago. And this is why it should be there. So it's very much, if you look at the language of Pence, but also of the other Christian Zionists, you can see how David has been evoked over and over again. So you see the Bible played role in that one. But even the second leg of his peace plan, if we can call it even peace plan, was his idea or his son-in-law's idea, prosperity for peace. And choosing the word prosperity, I think it's not by chance. Remember that all of these Christian Zionists actually, and the so-called Christian right in the States, they believe in the so-called prosperity gospel. This is what they have actually been exporting in many of the poor countries. In fact, they exploit the poor people in Latin America and certain countries in Africa and Asia by promising them prosperity if they follow their gospel, as to say. And so even in the choice of the word prosperity, you can actually hear that ideology of the Christian right active. And the third leg, and we will hear more from Ghassan about it, was the Abraham Accord. I mean, using Abraham actually as a cover for these deals that were done with the United Arab Emirates, with Morocco, etc. And if you listen again to Pence's speech at the Knesset, he talked about the importance of Abraham as the father of Isaac and Ishmael. For him, Ishmael is represented by the Arab states, Isaac is represented by Israel. And so it is so to say happy end. In the Bible, there is no happy end for Ishmael Isaac, because Ishmael is still the one who is second-class citizen. He is the son of the slave, so to say. But now Trump comes and he actually brings together what God was not able to bring together, Isaac and Ishmael. So that these are the three legs for the Pax Americana. And as I said, in all three, we see how the Trump administration employed biblical language in its Middle Eastern policy to please its evangelical base. Yet, while Christian Zionism ideology has been an important factor powering Trump's policies towards Israel, it is overly simplistic to believe that it is the primary element. What is, I think, more important is how biblical images are interwoven with a dominant American, what I call meta-narrative, that constitutes the foundation for the Pax Americana of the Middle East. And here I would like to refer to three major elements in this meta-narrative. One is the role of Israel. And by the way, many of these are not going to change under Biden. So the first one is the role of Israel. Israel, in quotation mark, has a special place in American discourse. There is an invisible bond that binds America and Israel together. When the US looks into the mirror, it does not see itself, but Israel. And when it looks at Israel, it sees itself. This is something very important. Why? Because both nations are settler colonial nations who occupied the lands of native people and pushed them into small reservations. This is actually very obvious, again, in Vice President Pence's speech at the Israeli Knesset. I quote, Pence is saying, during his historic visit to Jerusalem, President Trump declared that the bond between us, in his word, is woven together in the hearts of our people, and the people of the United States have always held a special affection and admiration for the people of the book. In the story of the Jews, we have always seen the story of America. It is the story of an exodus, a journey from persecution to freedom, a story that shows the power of faith and the promise of hope. My country's first settlers also saw themselves as pilgrims sent by Providence to build a new promised land. The songs and stories of the people of Israel were their anthems, and they faithfully taught them to their children and do to this day. So this settler colonialism is embedded in the notion of the chosen people, a notion that has played a prominent role in Jewish Israeli thought, as well as in American culture over the past 5 decades. The notion of a chosen people is often translated in American culture as American and Israeli exceptionalism and religious nationalism. So the Christian Zionists, they view America as the new Israel, or less directly, as a divinely elect nation of the contemporary world, chosen to save the world via its politics, economics, and culture, as well as its own moral goodness, if only to stay true to its true self. These narratives interweave elements of the biblical narrative with those of American history and myth, resulting in a synchronized nationalistic narrative of American chosenness that equates faithfulness to America with faithfulness to Jesus Christ, thus making American national identity a gospel imperative. So the bond between Israel and the US is close to being metaphysical. In an almost apocalyptic view, the world is imagined as the battleground between the forces of evil against those of good. The US and Israel are clearly seen on the right side of history. In the apocalyptic discourse, this battle will take place at the end of time, but here it is already happening now. And the US and Israel are fighting not only their own battle, but that of God. Again, I quote Pence, and I'm here to convey a simple message from the heart of the American people. America stands with Israel. We stand with Israel because your cause is our cause, your values are our values, and your fight is our fight. We stand with Israel because we believe in right over wrong, in good over evil, in liberty over tyranny. We stand with Israel because that's what Americans have always done, and so has it been since my country's earliest days. So Pence was speaking here about something more than a political or military alliance. This is a metaphysical alliance almost, an alliance of right against evil. So that's the first point. The second point that we need to keep in mind is the militarization. It may not be pure chance that the name chosen by Trump for his Middle East plan, you know what it is, the deal of the century, right? The deal of the century was originally the name of a 1983 American comedy featuring several American arms dealers trying to sell weapons to South American dictators. So arms deals were an important aspect of Trump's deal of the century. If we look at our region, in 2019, 3 countries in the Middle East spent over $100 billion on defense. Imagine, 100 billion with B. 62 billion by Saudi Arabia, third only after the US and China, 20 billion by Israel, 12 billion by Iran. With the latest $23 billion arms deal that the United Arab Emirates did with Trump one day before he left office, comes second in terms of military spending. The region is the recipient of over half of all weapons delivered to developing countries and over 1/4 of all arms shipments worldwide. 5 of the top 10 most militarized countries globally are found in the Middle East. Israel is the most militarized country in the region. So we have to understand that the main beneficiary of this spending is the US, and its military industry is the #1 exporters of arms to the region. So if we look today at the region, from Libya to Yemen, from Syria to Iraq, from Lebanon to Gaza, it looks very much like a shipwreck. And we have to understand that while in the first place, maybe the Christian right lobby plays an important role in this militarization, it's the military industry lobby that plays a very important role in binding the US and Israel together. And last but not least, and here I will end, populism versus human rights. And this might change actually under Biden. This is the only thing that might change. An important feature of the Trump plan was its disregard for international law and the right to self-determination. This was obvious from Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel capital and recognition of the annexation of West Sahara by Morocco. The Trump plan must be seen in a context of growing populism and right-wing ideologies in the US, Europe, Israel, and across the globe. All the accomplishments and lessons learned following Second World War that were enshrined in the Human Rights Charter, in the Geneva Convention, international law, are being questioned by these populist leaders. President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu have to be seen in this context. For them, might constitutes right. What is frightening is how God is portrayed as enabler of populism. In many speeches, both Trump and Netanyahu were celebrated as God's messenger here on earth to fulfill his will. Again, this was expressed most clearly in the prayer of one of the pastors at the opening of the American embassy in Jerusalem. I quote, "We want to thank you, Lord, especially today for the courageous leadership of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his determination to do whatever it takes to protect his people at all costs. We want to thank you for the tremendous leadership of our great president, Donald Trump. Without President Trump's determination, resolve, courage, we would not have be here today. And I believe further, I speak for every one of us when we say, we thank you every day that you have given us a president who boldly stands on the right side of history, but more importantly, stands on the right side of you, O God." So in short, it's not Jesus that is sitting to the right hand of God, but it's Trump and Netanyahu have assumed divine qualities.
Okay.
They stand on the right side of history and of God. This ideology is highly dangerous, especially as it is propagated by several powerful lobbies in the US. So it is this unholy alliance of religion, culture, military, and economy and the media that promotes and creates this Pax Americana. The real danger of this ideology is that it gives biblical and moral cover to the Israelization of Jerusalem and the exclusion of the Palestinian population by the Israeli government. It advocates for an exclusive Jerusalem, only for Jews. And so this Pax Americana, or Pax Romana, as in the Bible, stand in clear opposition to Pax Christi. We believe that in Jesus, God became human, thus making all human lives sacred. Thus, human rights may not be violated in the name of divine rights or the Bible used to take precedence over international law. The peace that Jesus came to proclaim is a peace based on justice and on the preferential option for the marginalized. To weaponize scripture and its biblical figures like David and Abraham for political ends, armed deals, and exploitation is nothing other than an unholy misuse of God's holy name. The scriptures are text of liberation and not text of occupation, annexation, and militarization. It is true that the Trump era has come to an end, yet his evangelical base and Zionist supporters are still spreading fake news and biblical myths to achieve their political goals. I will stop here and look forward to listening to my colleagues.
Thank you, Mitri, Raheb, and we'll pass on the word for Peter Lodberg. Værsgo, Peter.
Thank you very much, Vita. I have called my presentation Billy Graham and Christian Zionism, and that's because I am trying to write something on Christian Zionism as an important theological challenge and a discussion about is Christian Zionism today what is called in Kairos, Palestine, as status confessionis, and what does it mean? Also, along with the bishop of the Norwegian Lutheran Church, who have just sent out a statement on Christian Zionism. So my feeling is that, especially in our part of the globe, we are moving into a situation where we are going to discuss more thoroughly what is the right theology when it comes to understanding what is happening in the Middle East and especially in Israel-Palestine. So what I'm trying to present here is only work in progress, and there's still much to do. But I have been very much occupied with, of all people, Billy Graham. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the name Billy Graham. He lived from 1918 to 2018, and he died just before he could celebrate his 100th anniversary. He was, as probably you know, an American evangelist, a prominent evangelical Christian figure, and an ordained Southern Baptist minister. He renewed the American tradition from the period of the Great Awakening and organized big rallies where he called people to follow Jesus Christ, and he called these rallies for crusades for Christ. He has been called one of the most influential Christian leaders of the 20th century, and he was also called America's pastor. He was the spiritual advisor to a number of US presidents, and especially to Dwight D. Eisenhower, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Richard Nixon. Especially his close contacts with President Nixon created some interesting and serious problems for Billy Graham after the release of Nixon's tape recordings during his time in the White House. Nixon's tape from 1972 entails a very interesting conversation in the Oval Office between Nixon and Billy Graham. In 2002, Billy Graham was forced to apologize for the tape conversation in which he said that the Jewish stranglehold of the US media was ruining the United States and must be broken. He said in 2002, "Although I have no memory of this occasion back in 1972, I deeply regret comments I apparently made in an Oval Office conversation with President Nixon some 30 years ago." Mr. Graham said in a statement released by his Texas public relations firm, and he continued, "They do not reflect my views, and I sincerely apologize for any offense caused by the remarks," adding that he had spent his life building bridges between Jews and Christians. In the taped conversation, Graham said the Jewish stranglehold on the media has got to be broken, or this country is going down the drain. You believe that? Nixon replied. Yes, sir, Graham said. Oh boy, so do I, Nixon said. I can't ever say that, but I believe it. If you get elected a second time, then we might be able to do something about it, Graham replied. Later in the conversation, when Nixon raised the subject of Jewish influence in Hollywood, Graham says, a lot of Jews are great friends of mine. They swarm around me and are friendly to me because they know that I am friendly to Israel and so forth, but they don't know how I really feel about what they are doing to this country, the US, and I have no power and no way to handle them. Nixon, who became friends with Graham in the 50s during his time as vice president in the Eisenhower administration, then advises Graham, you must not let them know. And I'm very much interested in this silence and doublespeak, because the relief of the tapes from 72 in 50 years later in 2002 by the National Archives in the US took many people by surprise, because it is correct that Graham was known to be friendly to Israel, as he says. In a meeting Nixon and Graham had with former Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir, Nixon offered Billy Graham the ambassadorship to Israel, but Graham refused, as far as I know. What is not so known, and that is what interests me, is that Graham's friendship with Israel goes back to a meeting on June 23rd, 1969, at the Midtown Manhattan headquarters of the American Jewish Committee, when Billy Graham met with 24 rabbis and Jewish leaders. The meeting has been documented by an American historian named Dan Hummel from the University of Wisconsin, Madison. Hummel published in 2019 a very interesting book called Covenant Brothers, Evangelicals, Jews and US-Israeli Relations, on University of Pennsylvania Press. According to Hummel, the meeting was to allow Graham to convey the need for dialogue and communication between American evangelicals and American Jews, and to find common ground by explaining Graham's relationship with Israel. It was, as Hummel states, a pivotal moment in the American Jewish and evangelical Protestant interfaith dialogue. The Jewish leaders were wary of the so-called wild raving fundamentalist, but Graham won them over. He cited the Hebrew scriptures, Old Testament, to describe his understanding of God's covenant with the Jewish people, and explained his support for Israel as recompensation for past Christian anti-Judaism. All Christians are guilty as far as Jewish experience was concerned, Graham is quoted to have said. As we know, Graham was very influential, so that today, for many evangelicals, Christian Zionism has moved from the periphery into the center of the discussion. They believe in Christian Zionism that they are not only correcting the ancient injustice of anti-Semitism, but contributing to the salvation of the world, and to the completion of God's redemptive plans. It is for many the meta-narrative that makes sense of the biblical drama and current events and provides a roadmap to the future. In that, you could say that in this theology of the covenant, there is no place for Palestinian Christians. They don't exist. It also is very clear that some other theological issues are at stake. And if the evangelical Christianity, I would say, speaks with two voices. It supports Israel on the one hand and still wants to convert Jews on the other hand. And my suggestion is that Christian Zionism is not honest. It is dishonest, just like Billy Graham. There is a double standard that in very interesting ways was shown in the spring of 2020, when, according to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, revealed that a Christian TV channel in Jerusalem received an official permission from the Israeli government to broadcast its Christian programs to take the gospel about Jesus into Jewish homes, life, and heart. But the rabbi to Levites stressed that the missionary evangelical TV channel would destroy the Jewish-Christian relations. And he was supported by Sandra Boras from Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, who collect money among evangelicals to Jewish settlements. So you could say that they have had this permission by saying that they would not do mission, but they did mission, but it's not part of the agenda. So what I'm trying to find out and to work with is about this double standard, this dishonesty. And Dan Hummel concludes his interesting article on Christian Zionism on a note that is very interesting. He states, Christian Zionism and the criticism of the movement's politics, theology, tendency toward apocalypticism, ignoring and ignorance of the Palestinian experience and interest, anti-Muslim stereotyping, and near unquestioning allegiance to Israel are all worthy of discussion. Christian Zionism should, however, not be misrepresented. It is a fundamentally interfaith alliance that has informed and propelled Christian Zionists into the very halls of power. They have succeeded in a way very few interfaith movements have. And I will add that the Christian Zionist speaks with two tongues, and in an interesting way, that also goes back to Billy Graham's double standard, who laid the foundation for this intertwinement of Israel and evangelical Christianity. I think this was my time, Vita.
Yeah, thank you, Peter Lodberg. Tak til dig, Peter. And we'll go transatlantic and invite Ghassan Rubeiz. Please, now it's your turn.
Vida, du skal lige bede om at unmute, eller selv gøre det.
Okay, yeah. Please, Ghassan Rubeiz, you have to unmute your microphone.
I did.
Thank you very much.
I'm honored, I'm pleased and honored to be among you for this important occasion. I am also glad to be back in the ecumenical circle, because in my last 2 decades of retirement, I have been a bit distant from what is going on in the heart of the ecumenical movement. But I have been on my own way, thinking and writing and reflecting on issues that pertain to the heart of the ecumenical agenda. So I hope that my contribution will be complementary to what has been offered so far. There is more politics than theology in my presentation, so this might provide you with a little bit of spice. In my article, the Abraham Accords undermined much needed peace with Palestinians. The main point is in the title. The key word is undermined peace. The accords are marketed as a peace plan, but what is really happening is the escalation of tension in the region. The insertion of the name Abraham implies promotion of reconciliation between religious communities. In reality, the accords reinforce Shiite-Sunnite rivalry and the distance between Jews and Arabs. At the grassroots, there may be love affairs at the top between the kings and between Netanyahu and at the echelon, but not at the people's level. And that's what really confuses the world when they see the popularity of the Abraham Accord. They say, well, they're making peace, so how can we oppose it? How can we reserve it? But it is not at the bottom, it's among the elite. The basic rationale of the accord is too simplistic. Iran is portrayed as the main source of instability in the region. Unfortunately, the Islamic Republic in Tehran is not alone in destabilizing the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, Russia, and the US are equally responsible for the ongoing turmoil. Israel does stand out as a disturbance factor because it has introduced the nuclear defense strategy to the region in the 1970s. It has acquired the nuclear bomb to preserve an occupation and continue a process of ethnic cleansing. In updating my January 3 article, I would mention a few recent developments. Number one, the role of the Biden administration, in one word, it is minimal. Biden is improving relations with the Palestinians, but his efforts are largely symbolic. Economic assistance is palliative. There are no concrete efforts for the resolution of the conflict in the new administration. Talk about two-state solution and a caution against unilateral action from either side, that means the Israelis and the Palestinians, is only talk. So far, there is little recognition in the US State Department of normalized occupation. What is really being normalized is not relations, but occupation. Is looking like it's okay now. So the department, so there is little recognition in the US Department of a normalized occupation of Palestinian territories. You don't hear now anymore about the territories as being occupied. It's disputed land, of ongoing settlement expansion, of annexation in the Golan Heights, and of preventing Palestinians who live in Jerusalem to vote in their coming national elections. They are not allowed to vote. So far, we don't know. Biden is too troubled with domestic issues to prioritize Palestine or to challenge Israel's hardline supporters in the Congress, in the US Congress. Ironically, now the perceived threat from Iran to the US pales in comparison to the threat of domestic terrorism. The Americans now are less frightened from outside than from inside. And that's a historic shift that we all need to tremble about. But there are some signs of hope for diplomacy in the new administration, though feeble. The US team dealing with Iran and Israel-Palestine have new promising leadership. It is encouraging to see Robert Malley, for example, as the envoy to Iran. I don't know how many of you know about Robert Malley. Look him up. He's a promising guy. But Malley's hands are tied by the regressive political climate within the government on the issue of Palestine. Malley reports to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who has close commitment to Tel Aviv. On other issues, Blinken might be quite balanced and sensible, but he looks the other way on the issue of Palestine. Number two, what to expect from Israel's national March 23 elections. This fourth round of elections within the past 2 years will not change the character of the state or its leadership, which is moving to the right day by day. With or without Netanyahu, the Palestinian problem is no longer a central issue in Israeli politics. Malheureusement, as we say in French. Settlements expand on Palestinian land, blurring the line between occupation and biblically assigned Israeli sovereignty. Number three, Israel's intimidation campaign accompanies the Abraham Accords diplomacy. There is a growing campaign to stigmatize criticism of Israel. Critics are charged with anti-Semitism. We're all being, now as we're talking, we're all being labeled as anti-Semitic. And my son-in-law is Jewish. I love Jewish people and I love Arabs, and I am an international citizen. And that is what a Christian should be. Okay, with or without Netanyahu, the Palestinian problem is no longer a central issue. Okay, now we are number three. Israel intimidation campaign accompanies the Abraham Accords diplomacy. There is a growing campaign to stigmatize the critics. Many states in the US already criminalize the ban, divest, and sanction activities on US campuses. This is the only fruit that is flying now. The only bird that is flying is the civic creative approach to the BDS movement, and it's being attacked. There is also an Israeli-led campaign against the International Criminal Court, which is considering investigating Israel's record in war and occupation. And in rejoining the UN Human Rights Commission, the US cautions the UN body not to obsess over Israel's record. The Abraham Accords have emboldened the occupation not limited as purported. Number 4, what about the Palestinian role after the Abraham Accords? The Palestinian Authority is rushing for elections in May 22 and July 31st. The former date is for the parliament and the latter is for the presidential race. The elections are more of a circus than a race, given the Abbas machinery of electoral manipulation. Unfortunately, Palestine's leadership has failed to unite. Anger toward Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas intensifies at the grassroots level among Palestinians and among scholars, young scholars, women scholars especially. Abbas declared elections unexpectedly. After 15 years of an electoral freeze, a new cycle of election is declared. Prospects of a new leader emerging through the ballot box are currently dim. There is talk about Mandela-like figure in the presidential candidacy of Marwan Barghouti. How many of you know Marwan Barghouti? Marwan Barghouti. He is in an Israeli jail, sentenced for 5 lives. And ironically, intramural living may protect him from assassination if he were to win. Few promising leaders have had a natural death among Palestinians. They seem to be assassinated often. If Barghouti runs, he is likely to win. If he wins, he will be a game changer. But Barghouti as president is too threatening for both Netanyahu and Abbas. Israel in particular is not interested in facing a strong and popular Palestinian leader. The phenomenon of Mandela in Palestine requires a counterpart, a Willem de Klerk in Israel, but there is no such figure. Short of a totally civil approach in resistance to the occupation, it is difficult to achieve Palestinian political liberation. So far, if you make polls, you unfortunately find Hamas still popular. They will not win the elections, but they are still active, and that is drawing back the Palestinian cause. Hamas's insistence on armed struggle facing a superpower in the region. As for number 5, as for the Persian factor, the Iranian factor, Iran is also emboldened to press for intervention in the region these days. Iran's regime has survived the limitless sanctions. The hardliners in the parliament are on the rise in Tehran. They resist negotiation with the West. There is serious talk for the US to return to the Iranian nuclear deal, but neither Washington nor Tehran has yet come up with a formula of simultaneously ending sanctions and returning to acceptable levels of uranium enrichment. Any progress on US-Iran relations will positively affect the Palestinian question. After the accords, Israel's influence on the US negotiation with Tehran has declined. Netanyahu is losing status in the Biden regime. 6, any relevant changes in the Arab Gulf? Question mark. The Saudis are not in a position to join the Abraham Accord anytime soon. The Gulf Cooperation Council is back on the scene as a reunited regional body. There are some JCC gestures of reconciliation with Iran, Iran is also anxious for dialogue with the Gulf Council. This track of diplomacy has great potential on regional harmony and on the Palestinian question, but it has not matured yet. Tehran-Riyadh reconciliation is the low-hanging fruit for regional conflict resolution. It takes vision. It takes vision to see real peace possibilities. Number 7 and the last, a final note. In short, there are no signs of hope to stabilize the region in the short run. The Abraham Accords are on target in taking a regional approach to peace, but they have missed 2 critical components in the resolution of conflict. Number 1, the occupation of Palestine and Saudi-Iranian relations. The Abraham Accords is ignoring the central issue of Palestine and reinforcing tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran instead of trying to solve that major regional issue that is affecting everything. US policy in the region has to change to deal with the Middle East as an integrated unit. Patchwork diplomacy with isolated accords, peace here and war there will not work. The world is rapidly changing. Recurring worldwide spread of pandemics, global warming, water shortage, nuclear power, cyber terrorism, and uncontrolled social media. All these 21st century scary trends point in one direction: the need to respond to problems collectively and across borders. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghassan Rubeiz. And yeah, now we are trying to collect as much information and points of views as possible, from the start with Mitri, Pax Americana, and then to Peter Lodberg, the Billy Graham and Christian Zionism, and then Ghassan here at the end, the Abraham Accords and the undermining of the peace and the justice process. So we need a break now, and I promised you a break. So just a very short one. You can go and have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and whatever you like. But just 5 minutes, and then we are on again, and we look really very much forward having you 3 in a discussion. And then, yeah, see you in a few moments. Thank you so far. I think we will get started and invite you 3, Mitri, Peter, and Ghassan, to try to go into those angles where you can have a discussion or where you can comment on some points of view. So please, who will start
now? Yeah, is Mitri here?
Mitri is here as well. Yeah.
You can hear? Okay. So maybe one, I saw the complementarity of the presentations, but we may need to move into an issue of what can change, what hopefully needs to change in order to bring more light into the tunnel. Because it seems like there is a consensus that there is a feeling among many writers that there is no peace now, it's not possible, and as a result, the Palestinian issue is being shelved. And let's look for let's look for problems that can be solved. And let's look elsewhere. Maybe we can, so it's like something is lost in the forest and we can't find it. So let's go to another forest, maybe we'll find it. But the thing is in this forest, it's here.
Mm.
That's one point.
So who will respond? Peter and Mitri, feel free to take over.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think it's clear right now that, I mean, there is no solution in sight. And it's not only for Palestine. I mean, Lebanon is part of the issue as well. I mean, they are also stuck there, Syria and so on. For me as Palestinian, the name of the game right now is resilience. This is what we can really enhance. Because there is no solution in sight, we need to empower the people to stay here, to give them the right education, to give them the right tools, so that hopefully when the larger picture will change, there will be also a change maker there to bring about the change. So that's one. The other thing, I think it's, I don't want us to be fully pessimistic because, I mean, I see also many signs of hope. If I look at the US, for example, I see new Jewish voices that are really becoming more aware. Actually, today the president of Reform Judaism in the US said in an interview that we are fed up with Netanyahu. So I think, I mean, Israel now is becoming so ugly, really, that many of the Jews don't want to be associated with it. Unfortunately, many of the populist leaders like to be associated with it. That's the, you know, that's the contradiction. So that's, but also if I look at the young Palestinians, I mean, when I go to the States at universities, etc., I mean, we have a new generation of Palestinians who were born in the US, they spoke that language, they know the culture, and they did not actually forgot Palestine. On the contrary, their parents usually were not involved in politics, but they are much, much more involved in politics, and they raise their you know, their voices. What worries me is that Christian Zionism is not anymore a northern phenomena, but actually today it's spreading, especially in the South, in the global South. So in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, you have now more Christian Zionists than in the US. That is very, very worrying. I don't think that, and maybe just, yeah, so let me stop here maybe, and then later I can comment on a bit on Peter and on Ghassan.
Thank you.
I'm very interested in following the politics of our Prime Minister, Frederiksen, because it seems as if she is changing politics towards Israel-Palestine and is going back to, you could say, traditional labor movement politics concerning Israel, and that was very much in favor of the whole kibbutz movement and the Labour Party in Israel, and she has a political understanding that she is giving new life to an old Labour Party in Denmark by going back. And I take her interest in going to Tel Aviv with the Austrian Prime Minister that has been announced yesterday or this morning because of the corona situation. I think that we should be very aware and try to enlarge that interest of Israel also to encompass an interest into Palestine. And there I would need some information from you who know more about the situation, about the corona situation in Palestine today, and if it was correct that the Palestinian authorities, they did not ask for vaccines from Israel, or how was that? Because I think that will be a major issue the coming days and weeks in Denmark, and there we need very precise information about how is the situation of corona in Palestine, and how do you see the Palestinian authorities dealing with that crisis, and what do you expect from the international community in that regard? I think that it could help us in our discussion.
Mitri?
Yeah,
would you help us?
I guess regarding the corona, I see that Uffe has also in the chat something about apartheid, corona apartheid perspective. I mean, so far Israel, I think they have vaccinated over 60% of their people because they were able to get the vaccine very quickly. They used actually the Israeli intelligence, Mossad, to get the vaccine. That's one. Secondly, they made a deal with Pfizer that they will supply them with all the data about everyone in Israel who's going to be vaccinated. And thirdly, they paid a much higher price than the market price to get it. And they are using them in military general actually to supervise the whole vaccination, because I mean they are a militarized country and they are used in wars and so on for the military to run these kinds of things. So this is why I think Israel was able to vaccinate that many. Now regarding Palestine, so far we got only 2,000 vaccines, mainly for health workers, and the Palestinian Authority is buying for $10 million, I think something maybe like 500,000 vaccine, but they are not yet here. They were supposed to be here. Now they are staying March. I'm not sure. And if Israel will allow them in, we are not sure, because these are the Russian vaccines, not the American, not the British, etc. Last but not least, yesterday, Netanyahu actually announced that Israel has more vaccines than they need, and that they are going to give these vaccines to any country who will move their embassy to Jerusalem. So any country who will move their embassy to Jerusalem will get the vaccines that Israel has in more than what they need.
The same approach to the Abraham Accord, rewards for compliance.
Exactly.
That's the logic.
Exactly.
But Mitri,
Could
I ask you a question, Mitri? Did the Palestinian authorities ask for vaccinations from Israel?
I know, I don't think they asked, but according to the Geneva Convention, actually, it's Israel's responsibility in an occupied land to care for those who are under its occupation. I think for the Palestinian Authority, it will be a political debacle if they will ask Israel to give them vaccination. But they are asking Israel is to allow for the Russian vaccine to be allowed in, and Israel is not allowing that yet in.
Is this useful for you, Peter, because you probably will have a voice into the Danish debate about this turn from Mette Frederiksen, our prime minister?
Yeah, I think that we cannot avoid Mette Frederiksen going to Israel.
Of
And
course
we
not.
cannot avoid Mette Frederiksen to try to renew the social democratic tradition. I mean, that's her choice. But what we can try is to enlarge the scope so that when she travels to Israel, it's not only Israel, but it is a whole area. So I think that that would be my perspective. That we, of course, we express the wish that she also visits the Palestinian areas and also take the situation in Palestine into consideration. So it's not because, on the other hand, it will strengthen the present debate in Denmark that is forgetting the situation in Palestine.
Yeah.
But you know, I think if they come in March, most probably before the Israeli election, I mean, politically speaking, there will not be many things to talk about because, you know, everyone will be in the mood of elections and nobody will know how the election are going to end, both in Israel as well as in Palestine. So I think the picture will become clearer maybe in summer. And most probably then, if a new initiative is to start, most probably not before that. And I think this is what the Biden administration is now relaxed. Anyhow, they are not doing much because I think of the two elections. Besides what Ghassan said about the internal issues, but also that now everything is moving.
How bad is the situation in Palestine among people?
Very bad. Now we have the third wave, and now, especially here, we are really experiencing it. I mean, there are so many people that we know got COVID-19. I mean, Noha, you know Noha at the college, she got Corona. My wife got Corona. Our financial manager, Elia, is now in quarantine. He got Corona. There are right now many people that we know who are in a very critical situation. And so it is very, very, now people are feeling actually how threatening. I think they were not taking it seriously before. So today our Prime Minister closed again all schools and universities for the coming 2 weeks. So yeah, right now it's very serious, and it's the British and South African mutation that now we are dealing with. We don't have yet the Brazilian one, but most probably it will come sometime.
And how is the situation in Gaza?
In Gaza, it's interesting. I was talking to them yesterday. Life is like almost normal. I'm not sure why. Infections are down, maybe because they already had maybe herd immunity or something. But I was shocked yesterday to hear that the situation in Gaza right now is better than in the West Bank.
Interesting.
Hopefully Nuha and those people we know is recovering, and give greetings to all of them. But let's go further on with the discussion, and I know that Anna Karin and Uffe also want to take part in the conversation, but still you three, you have opportunities to lead us to some kind of helicopter view.
What I have.
You have to unmute.
Yes. I'm unmuted. Yeah.
Okay, you are there. Yeah.
The question is, what can the Palestinians have such moral power? Or we say that they have no political power, but they have the right cause, because they're asking for something reasonable to get back their land. And they have the asset of being terrestrial. They're resilient. They stay on the land, compared to the Lebanese who keep leaving under stress. The Palestinians must be proud that they are their feet are cemented with the ground, and that's a great asset. The question is about leadership. That's where the weak link in the future of Palestine. How come Hamas is still active? How can the Palestinians unify among themselves at the leadership level? How about the diaspora? The diaspora Palestinians need to be more activated. I'm just raising points, okay? The Palestinian diaspora has so much freedom of movement. They are relatively, in many cases, prosperous and able to bring intellectual and financial resources. And so we need to have them more active. And the question of working with the liberal Jewish voices. There are 6 or 7 Jewish movements in America and abroad that are really eagerly trying to embrace the Palestinian in liberation, for not only for the sake of Palestine, but for the sake of Israel, for a secure future and peaceful Israel, a just Israel. So how can we reinforce the cooperation between Arabs and Jews in a cause for everybody, a win-win? How can we turn the win-lose paradigm that predominates the conflict into a win-win situation, whereby my gain is your gain and your gain is mine, instead of the reverse? Just some reflections on that.
Peter, from a theological point of view about this speaking with two mouths, Zionism, can you have also some reflection? Can theology?
But it's interesting that if you look from a historical perspective, Christianity has treated Jews very badly over many hundred years. And seen in that from that perspective, it is very interesting that you could say that Christian Zionism for the first time is a movement that is trying to change that history, but it comes with a very heavy price, because the theology that is behind that unification of, you could say, Christian and Jewish understanding when it comes to the state of Israel comes with the price that there is somebody who has to pay that price, and that is the Palestinian people. So what on one hand looks very interesting from a historical perspective looks very dangerous from the present perspective. So in that I think that if we are going to to change the Danish discussion that is very much inspired by Christian Zionism, even though by those people who don't think about themselves as Christian Zionists. I think we have to deal with it from a theological and historical perspective that on the one hand takes seriously that here we have a long history of confrontation between especially Christianity and Judaism in Europe, and on the other hand that we are now in a new situation where we have to deal with that also when it comes to Israel-Palestine. So I think perhaps in a way this discussion on Christian Zionism is very, very important in a Danish situation.
But you know, Peter, I think looking at Christian Zionism, it's not that really they are in love with Israel. As you said, there is this double tongue because they would like to bring all the Jews to Palestine so that 2 of them will be killed and the third will convert to Christianity. So actually their theology is calling for the annihilation of the Jewish people. And, you know, Israeli politicians know that. So it's not of love, but I always describe it as 2 people who have really no affections to each other, but they don't mind sharing a bed as long as it fulfills some of their, you know, desires. So each one is filling the other's desire, but it's not love really. This is how I see this, you know, this relationship. And the other thing is, yes, I mean, we need to learn from history, and I think the church has to confront this anti-Judaistic tradition that for a long time was part of their theology. But we should also not forget that the problem actually with the church, say in Germany in the 30s and 40s, was that it sided with those in power. So if you today sides with those in power, actually there is no lessons from history. So they are repeating the same issue. And this is why I don't believe really that churches have learned their lesson. I think they are still in that tradition of siding with power because they don't have the guts to speak truth to power and to pay a price that only, you know, the confessing church in Germany, few people were able really to pay.
Yeah, I think we will now open for the audience, and of course, Uwe, that is following the situation so well. You have to start, Uwe. Where are you?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't have to dominate this, but
no, not at all. But just
I wrote a couple of issues in the chats, and some of them have already been addressed. But again, back to Danish politics, I mentioned what I just heard this morning, that yesterday there was a meeting on Israel-Palestine, which was called by Enhedslisten, and to their shock, the present Minister of Foreign Affairs, who has visited Palestine and been sympathetic and understanding, is confirming that what the former government was intending to do, namely to empty the role of the United Nations Human Rights Commission of its special mandates called Item 7 to report every year on Israel-Palestine, should be abolished or at least emptied of its contents. So I think Ghassan mentioned that the US is rejoining United Nations Human Rights Commission, but are the teeth of this commission now slowly being taken out and eroded by such an approach?
It's very important seen from also from a Danish point of view. Who will take over and have an answer or a comment?
Are you addressing the speakers or the audience?
Ghassan, are you trying? Yeah.
Well, I'm not I can try. My point is that this United Nations, there is an overall intimidating response from Israel that goes also to Washington, and from Washington it goes to Europe, and that is okay. Now it's the Abraham Accord. That should be the dominant theme of peace, and any kind of human rights activities or ICC, International Criminal Court activities, is sort of rivals and undermines the paradigm of alliances. Unfortunately, the Abraham Accord is not about peace. It's about, as we discussed, it's about alliances. And in the history of peacemaking in the region, we got in 1983, the Lebanon was forced to make peace with Israel. It only lasted a few months. Peace not based on justice does not last. Even among the Arabs, Syria and Egypt tried to, in 1958, tried to unite, and it lasted 2 or 3 because it was from top to bottom. It was for the Arabs, they should unite, but not by force, not by the king or the president. The same thing, the Israelis tried to make peace with the Christians of South Lebanon. In 1978, they created an alliance with the Lebanese, Southern Lebanese pack, yeah. And this only lasted a few years, and then it dissolved. And when Hezbollah came and chased the Israelis out of South Lebanon in 2000, the Christians were caught between the Israelis and the Hezbollah and the Shiite community, who magnanimously, the Hezbollah acted like in the spirit of Christ, and they forgave the Christian who sided with Israel and with arms. So Judaism was uniting with Christianity against Shiites. Again, peacemaking with not built on truth and justice does not last.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I think what is important for Denmark and Sweden and the Scandinavian countries, because Scandinavian countries played a very important role in the post-Second World War era, before actually in the creating of the United Nations, and international law has a very special role in Scandinavian thinking. What is happening right now with eroding all of these UN issues is actually what I hinted to. It is this populism that believe actually we don't need any international. I mean, people are also, tired from international organizations, large organizations, because they failed people in many ways. And not talking about the UN alone, even if you look at the World Council of Churches, I mean, it is in a crisis. You look at all of these big organizations. This is the theme of the time. The problem is that now populism is trying to fill that gap. And this is very dangerous because all the lessons that were learned after Second World War will be actually lost. But I know Anna Karen, she has her hands for 1 year, 1 hour now.
Anna Karen from Sweden, we love that you're here with us, and please share your comments and questions and your long experience with us.
Thank you immensely, and thank you, Mitri, and many warm greetings to Najwa and all friends who have got COVID. We really pray for you all and want you to recover very, very soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing so important thoughts on the analysis of the US relationship to Palestine. I have questions regarding a set of priority that I'm wondering about. We are trying in Europe to work, of course, to uphold international law. That is very important. But I would like to have your comments on the following priorities. One, to support the presence of the Palestinian people and the presence of the Palestinian people and especially the Palestinian Christians. To uphold the presence of the Palestinian Christians, I see as a priority for the world church. And the second, to fight international law and apartheid. And the third one, to try to get more countries to recognize Palestine as a state. I would like you to comment on these three issues. And Uffe asked me in the chat to introduce who I am. And I'm the European coordinator of Global Kairos for Justice and an old minister in Church of Sweden. And I also worked for the World Council of Churches for some years. So I have been in the ecumenical for a long time. My first visit to Palestine was in February 1988. And since then I have continued this work. But Mitri, especially, what do you think about these priorities?
I think they go together. Strengthening the Christian presence, I think, is an important role, especially for churches and Christian organizations. On the state level, recognizing Palestine is something we need to keep pushing for. And on the civil society level, fighting apartheid is definitely a priority. So I see them going actually hand in hand. But each one has a different target group that needs to work with.
Yeah, and Leif Vestergaard, he's in the board of Betlehems Venner, but you can tell more about yourself, Leif, before you have a comment or a question. You have to unmute.
So,
yeah,
I have a short question. How do we avoid be calling anti-Semites when we are criticizing the state of Israel? I'm especially looking for what's going on in Germany at the moment, but I think it's a tendency that if you are criticizing the politics in Israel, you very soon will be called an anti-Semite.
Maybe Ghassan would like to.
this is really difficult and worldwide.
I don't understand the question. Sorry, can you repeat the question? Can we?
Yeah, also, if we are criticizing the politics in Israel and the state of Israel's approach to the Palestinian topics, then we very soon will be called anti-Semite.
Yeah.
And why? And can we avoid this?
It is
another way.
Yeah, okay. I understand the question now. It relates to the level of security of Israel. Israel is hypersensitive about its future. It knows it has occupied, it's living with 6.8 million Palestinians between the river and the sea, and they don't know what to do. It knows that the future is scary. It cannot digest the occupation. It cannot cover the guilt of displacing people, displacing a nation to create comfort for another. This high level of insecurity and guilt makes perception of the situation of the world makes them so defensive that any kind of criticism is demonized, is criminalized. So it's sort of like it's a defense mechanism. In the language of Freud, it's rationalization. They're rationalizing their aggressive response to a justified criticism. Israel needs to be secure and needs a promising future, but not at the expense of their neighbors. So appropriate criticism of Israel serves Israel in the long run. Inappropriate alliance with Israel reflexively does not serve Israel in the future, because it just makes the hole deeper for the future. So that when you are fear is the heart of mental health. When you are excessively afraid, your reality changes, and that's the response to criticism. It's an over-rationalizing response.
Maybe to add to that, Life, you cannot avoid that. Why? Because it's a tactic. You can listen on the internet to an interview with Shulamit Aloni, who used to be Israel Minister of Culture from Meretz party. In an interview, she said, every time Israel would like to silence people, they use the card of anti-Semitism. Now, the word anti-Semitism actually came up in late 19th century Europe, and it meant actually to demonize the whole Jewish people. This is anti-Semitism. If you say all Jewish people are this or that, because there is no all Jewish people. I mean, Judaism is very diverse, like Christianity, like Islam, etc. So you cannot actually demonize the whole religion and the whole group of people. That's anti-Semitism. But critiquing a state is something actually that is part of our prophetic tradition. If we learn anything from the Holocaust, is that no state should have, impunity. Because once a state has impunity, you end up with something like Nazi Germany. And so it's our role, if we really want to learn from anti-Semitism, is to fight any state who wants to, being immune to criticism. So, do what you can, as long as you do it in truth, and as long as you talk about facts. Whatever they call you, that's really not your problem, that is their problem. And today, actually, those people who are called anti-Semite are so many that the whole thing of anti-Semitism is not working anymore. Now, forget about Germany. Germany is a hopeless case. I mean, I studied in Germany, and they will not be able actually to get out of their trauma. For me, I tell them, actually, they are repeating what happened before, siding with the state, siding with the powerful against the marginalized people. And I don't buy this as love to Israel.
From the chat room, there was a question, a follow-up from Ghassan. What about the elections in May and July in Palestine, Mitri. And this probably it could be great to have some comments about the role that Hamas still is playing in Palestine.
I mean, you know, elections are important in any democratic process. And for me, what is really important to know is that today, maybe 40% of the Palestinian people have never voted in their lives. Because the last elections took place 15 years ago. Which means everyone who was at that time, 3 years until now, all of them, and this is a huge number, have never voted. And so elections are important. The question is, how is this election going to play out? There is a talk that they might come up with a unified like lists where Fatah, Hamas, and all the parties have somehow some representation, which means you don't have options, but you have one option to vote for that one list. That will somehow safeguard some kind of unity, but actually it empties the whole idea of free elections because you don't have choice. So this is the debate right now that's going on. It's not solved yet. So there is a debate on every day here about this and who could, who could run, etc. I mean, they are asking now everyone who wants to run to pay $20,000. I mean, how many people have $20,000 to put ahead of time, to run for election, etc. I mean, there are so many problems with these elections, although elections are very, very, very important.
Ghassan?
Yeah, I hear from Khalil Jahshan, one of the Palestinian scholars in Washington here. He says that if the elections were, the polls show that Hamas is in a good position, unfortunately, but what's his name? I'm blocking the name of the person in jail who might run.
Barghouti, you mean?
Barghouti, yeah. Barghouti has a chance, but Israel is not may not facilitate the possibility of electing somebody. So all the readings that I have done on the elections show that there are problems. The diaspora is very much marginalized in the elections. They are not voting, and they should be voting. Israel does not allow voting in Jerusalem. That's a major problem. Barghouti is not allowed probably to run. Abbas seems to be the most likely person to win, but nobody now really, he's not popular any longer. He's in the category of Netanyahu now among Palestinians. And so there is the quality of the elections is not good enough to really genuinely produce a promising leadership for the Palestinians, which is badly needed. So, but we don't know yet whether the elections will take place, whether Barghouti or some other possible leader who could run. And, my feeling is that Arab elections have not been promising in general so far. I mean, in Lebanon, in everywhere you find. So why, I'm really discouraged at that point. But in the future, Palestine has so much intelligence, so much education, so much possibilities for the future, for the young Palestinians who are emerging with a lot of good potential. And I'm hoping that in cooperation with the liberal Jewish voices, they can turn the power structure around. But I do not expect much change unless both Jews and Arabs cooperate to liberate Israel and to liberate Palestine simultaneously. But that's a long road. But there is no other way. You cannot have a Palestine Arab style, Arab politics style, and you cannot have an Israel the way it is running now, chauvinist. So you need a regional approach to Palestine and a regional approach to the entire region. And that's why it's a long run, long-term approach, long-term perspective.
Yeah, guess so. Yeah.
I'm no expert on internal Palestinian political situations, but what I observe from here, that is that, and also how the European public and our politicians reacted to the last election in Palestine, is that they can use either way in order to support their Israeli policy. I mean, if Hamas and the PLO work together in one list, that will be a democratic problem. And if Hamas and PLO or Fatah is having different lists, then they cannot agree. So, I mean, it is the Europeans, we are using this double standard. And when it comes to elaborating or evaluating Palestinian policy, whatever they do it wrong. And I think that's a real challenge to us, that our politicians can use either side to our own benefit.
I agree with you, Peter, and I think, I mean, the problem is, you know, when I personally cannot hear anymore the word democracy, because it is so, you know, it's the misuse of it is so much, you know, because how can you have a democracy if over 50% of the people live under poverty line? How can you have democracy if everything you do is controlled by other people? How can you have, I mean, you know, for a democracy, I mean, why democracy was possible in Scandinavia, see, because you know, a small nation, mainly middle class, educated, the economy is more or less, you know, running well, you have a good education. So all of these components, they make democracy what it is. If you take all of these components and you tell people have democracy, that is, I mean, that is not possible, because you need all the ingredients. I mean, look at the US. Who would have thought that the US, with this long tradition of democracy, will end up electing Trump and then his people actually going, you know, storming the Capitol? I mean, and you know, with all that long tradition, with the strong economy and so on, you have populism popping up. So, yeah, I mean, it is an uphill struggle, and this is, I think, where our role as civil society agents, as churches, etc., to create, you know, the needed infrastructure for democracy. This is why education is important. This is why economic empowerment is important. This is why critical thinking is important. And this is why I think culture is important. And this is why we invest in culture at the university, because I think this is one of the most important ingredients for any prosperous future state. And you know, I mean, we didn't colonize yet any country, you know, to have enough, to gather enough, you know, riches so as to have a stable economy, you know. So unfortunately, we are living still from the crumbs. I mean, the occupation is costing us more than what the entire aid that we receive.
Once again, Mitri, I didn't get that one.
You know, the Israeli occupation cost Palestine per year $7 billion. I mean, if we don't have the occupation, we will be economically much, much better. We can export, we can import. You know, we have oil and gas in the Mediterranean that we could use. I mean, Palestine could, all of that right now, actually, the occupation is stealing all of these opportunities from us. So, and these were actually would be important ingredients also for a stable Palestine.
And if we should take a parallel to South Africa, it was one of the elements that it was too expensive to have apartheid. And that could be our one of the hopes we could share, that it's too expensive in the long run.
Right, and Ghassan said that, you know, you needed a declerk, which is not available in Israel. And even now, after apartheid ended, I mean, the blacks now have the possibility to vote, but their economic situation actually did not. I mean, if you go to the Bantustans, unfortunately, the Bantustans, they do not look much, much better than 30 years ago. That is the very sad situation. So again, we are back to economy.
Yeah. And Nils Peter, you raised your hand.
Yes, I almost finished reading Jeff Harper's latest book, Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine. And I really like the picture he's painting of one democratic state from the river to the sea. But at the same time, I'm wondering, is it realistic at all? Mitri, you said earlier that no solution is in sight. Is it realistic to think like this, one democratic state for all its, with full rights for all its inhabitants?
Who is responding?
Ghassan, you want to respond?
Okay, they're really difficult. One state solution is possible, but only maybe in stages. Maybe the first confederation is at the first stage, and ultimately you need to have social change to integrate people, to liberate, to change their attitude toward religion and their understanding toward identity, their understanding of governance, their understanding of development and its role in nation building. So neither the Israelis nor the Arabs, the Palestinians, are now in a socialized state to live together under one state. But if you think of long term, like 50 years, and have it in stages, the first stage could be some kind of a confederation or a two-state arrangement whereby human rights, the focus would be on equalizing opportunity for education and income and security for all. And gradually, as people change their attitudes toward a number of things, of empowerment program, over 50 years, you can lead people to unite. And that also depends on what happens in the region. It's difficult to conceive of a one-state solution in an Arab Middle East where there is so much turmoil and intrigue and injustice. So any democratic state now in the region is a threat to its neighbors, because all its neighbors are living under illegitimate regimes with hardly any exception. You can mention Tunis as an exception. But so therefore, we need to first establish a human right paradigm whereby everybody is secure and allowed to live in peace and with hope, and some kind of recognition of Palestinian identity and Jewish identity, and gradually approximate the one-state solution. But that's not on the horizon immediately.
I think, Niels Peter, you know my answer that maybe it's too late for a two-state solution, too early for a one-state solution, and we are stuck in this limbo which we call apartheid. And I think if you look at the title of the book of Jeff Halper, it talks about colonialism. Now, what Israel is doing is not any colonialism, it's settler colonialism. And this is a European European kind of settler colonialism, a European flavor. I don't think that the European Jews look at the Palestinians or are going in the next even 50 years to look to Palestinians as equal, because this is against the settler colonial mentality. The settler colonial mentality is that you have supremacy, you are better, you are God's chosen people, you are this and that, and settler colonialism actually is not interested in cooperating with the local and native people. Settler colonialism is interested to replacing and kicking them out with all different means. And if you look at the 100 years history, this is what was happening. Taking more land, kicking more people out. And so I don't see actually, although I would love that, but unfortunately, it's against the settler colonial mindset. And we need to keep challenging. I think this is now the name of the game right now, is challenging the settler colonial mentality, challenging apartheid. That's all what we can do right now. To talk about two states, one state, you know, I think it's even waste of time. You know, a friend of mine, a Jewish liberation theologian, Mark Ellis, talks about the ecumenical deal. The ecumenical deal was basically that the churches and Judaism said, look, we will have a deal. You will keep repenting for the Holocaust, and we will forget you as long as you don't mention Palestine and you don't really fight for Palestine. You can have nice statement about Palestine, but who cares about statements, you know? And then there is another kind of deal, which is the European deal. European deal says, including Denmark, we are for a two-state solution, right? I mean, this is the official. But every day they know that the two-state solution is being actually made impossible by the settler colonial project. But the deal is, you know, we say two states, but we do nothing to stop the colonization of Palestine. That's the state deal. And so we need to keep challenging. This is why I think there is no solution in the near future. It is, unfortunately, we continue the struggle against a settler colonial it's the last settler colonial project in modern history. This is what it is.
Yeah, we are running out of time. I don't know, Leif, are you putting up your hand? No, okay. Would you have like a final comment, some of you, or some from the audience, some from the board?
I would just say that to provide a future, some light into the future, I could say that that I can name a few things where things need to change. US foreign policy needs to change. Israeli society mentality, which is moving to the right, needs to change. The Abraham Accord has to be modified to accommodate the Palestinian statehood. The role of Palestinian in the diaspora must become more active. Palestinian resistance must focus on civic resistance and empowerment. And so these are the areas where I look for hope in the future. US foreign policy, Israeli society, Abraham Accord change, role of Palestinian in the diaspora, and Palestinian resistance focusing on nonviolence.
And luckily, these lectures and this conversation is recorded. But if we give time for two comments, then we'll end this session. But Americana, you are there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you all so much for it has been really a very good time together, and I'm very glad that Mitri came out with it, this clear language on settler colonialism and the apartheid, and that should be our absolute main priority, to delegitimize the meta-narrative of the Israeli superpower, and to delegitimize the presence in the land, and to advocate for the Palestinian Christians and the Palestinian people as inherent to the land. I'm very happy for that clarification, and it's a long struggle, and we will continue as long as we breathe.
Thank you, Americana. Yeah. And daughter is from the board.
Well, just to say that there are a few questions in the chat. I'm not sure if there's time to answer, but could you take a look at those questions?
I mean, I would rather not answer them because it needs more time maybe, but yeah. What I would say is just to add to what Ghassan said. I think, I mean, you know, there is this saying, I'm not sure from whom, Lord, give me the courage to change things that I can change, and the patience for things that I cannot change, and give me the wisdom to distinguish one from the other. And for me, I mean, our approach so far was, let's do what we can do. I mean, you know, because I mean, changing the whole world, that's only for the messiahs. It's not we cannot do it. It's not our role. What we can do is, again, strengthening the resilience of our people, offering critical thinking and good education, especially in the culture, writing and publishing and framing the discussion and the discourse in theology, but also in politics as much as we can. So we do what we can do, and the rest we leave to God, because I think if we think we can change the whole world, that is not our role. So, and I think, again, thinking of Betlehem Venner, I mean, small organizations, but they are doing great things in your context, and you are changing a lot, bringing life to students, supporting our work, but also changing the discourse in Denmark. And I know this is what Americana is doing in Sweden. So we continue to do the small things, because it's only the small people that are doing the small steps. They are ultimately changing the face of the globe.
Thank you. And Peter?
Yes, in the coming time, I will follow very closely the Danish government, because I think they are changing politics under the cover of the corona situation. And I also afraid of the development in Germany, where and that it will come to Denmark, that criticism that support of BDS will be seen as anti-Semitism. And I think we are in for a very difficult time because many things can happen also in our country because of the corona situation and what is called the Abrahamic peace in the Middle East. So I think we should be very much aware of what is really going on behind the scenes.
And before closing this session, I would bring a warm thank you to all of you participants today from Betlehems Venner, and join our small organization if you want to follow this debate and gaining more knowledge about what's happening there. And of course, we believe in empowering young people and women, and of course also men in the area, and therefore we support Dar Kalima and the university by sponsorships, but we also work for giving financial support for the Kafkau. And please go and find the Kafkau at internet and see what they are doing, also bringing news to the Western world from another point of view, from academics and with working with media. That's really important, and share it at where you can, at Facebook and wherever you can, at different platforms. So we really believe in this work, and just a link back historically to the Scandinavian countries, that in fact it was what changed Denmark. It was education and educational programs for the farmers. So a democratic change, it's a long process, and it means that the small people need to know what's the future, and what can be a future where we live in justice and with peace and together. So thank you for all these perspectives and all that knowledge that we shared with one another, and take care and have a great springtime. And yes, God is also a game changer, and let's also pray for the change that is needed in the Middle East, and even in the US and in Europe as well. Thanks a lot for today. Take care.